Afternoon. Welcome all of you to the open ceremony of the 7th European Symposium on Aerobiology, focus on bioaerosols and environmental impact. Thank you to participate in this virtual symposium. Of course, we would like to receive you in Córdoba to enjoy during this symposium in this city that has been declared as World Heritage by UNESCO 4 times. However, the symposium has decided to, with the impact of the COVID spread all the world, and as you know, many countries in Europe are under health alert. For this reason, the local committee and also the society board invite all of you to live a dream and enjoy during these days in Córdoba. Yes, I say a dream, it is a dream, but dreams can become a reality. I would like first to thank to the European Aerobiology Society Board and to the different committees, the advisory committee, scientific committee, and the local, for all your active role in the organization of this symposium, always transmitting calm and good ideas during this long and particular situation that we have lived, with some uncertainty when taking decisions. I also want to thank to the companies that sponsored the symposium. Thank to Swisscom, Lanzoni, and ICE HPT, and especially to the PIC company, a company that organizes projects and different events. Thanks for offering all facilities in the organization of this symposium. Then thank you again for all of you. Now I will try to give the floor to the different participants in this welcome ceremony. First, I give the floor to Dr. Aguilar. Her background is on analytic chemistry focused on nanomaterials. And today, Maripaz is the Dean of the Faculty of Science in the University of Córdoba. Maripaz, it's your time.
Thank you very much, Professor Galan. Thank you, Carmen. Good afternoon. It is my pleasure to be present in this ceremony, and I would like to give my compliments to the audience and to the member of this committee, to our mayor, Mr. Jose Maria Bellido Roche, to Professor Galan Soldevilla, the president of this symposium, to Professor Michel Thibaudon, the former president of the 6th symposium, which was celebrated 4 years ago, to Professor Ingrid Assolien, President of the European Association of Aerobiology, as well as to Professor Quesada Moraga, our Vice Dean for Research and Territorial Development. I would also like to welcome everyone to our faculty, the Faculty of Sciences, where Professor Carmen Galan belongs. She's a well-renowned researcher, but I would like to emphasize her prominent research work and her really wide research experience on the aerobiology field. For those who don't know yet, she's currently the president of the Working Group on Aerobiology and Pollution of the Allergies and Clinical Immunology European Academy. She has been president of the European Association of Aerobiology, and she is currently member of the Spanish Committee to Mitigate Climate Change, and also member of the Andalusian Committees of Environment and Biodiversity. Today, you will have the chances to know the latest advances on aerial platforms in aerobiological studies, 16 years later, the drones invasion, in the opening lecture of this conference by Professor Eugenio Domínguez Vilches, her mentor and former rector of our university, as well as former dean of our faculty. The Faculty of Sciences feels very honored to count on them among all researchers. The topic of this conference, bioaerosols and environmental impact, is a hot topic nowadays, and there is a huge need to acquire a better understanding and new detection methods of bioparticles in the air. This pandemic is an example of the important role of aerobiology to acquire a better understanding of all the phenomena involved, as well as the need for multidisciplinary approaches that can lead to science advancement to protect the environment and people's health. Our faculty is carrying out different projects related with the detection of this virus in different environmental samples and how the early detection can be performed. Some of these projects are made in cooperation with some public institutions, such as the Córdoba City Hall, through the water supply company. This is how the knowledge resulting from public research institutions, such as universities, should be incorporated to implement policies that have an active role and direct influence on citizens' health and welfare. I hope you all enjoy this virtual visit to the faculty and to the University of Córdoba. As Professor Galán said, well, we could dream and think we are physically in Córdoba. And it's a pity we cannot do it actually this year, but well, you can always come back and visit our city. Plenty of cultural heritage, and why not, plenty of places to explore and to visit from the and I think they are interesting from the aerobiological point of view. The good news is that this meeting is still to be celebrated and the scientific discussion will be empowered. Since the topics covered in this conference are so different and so interesting, I foresee this symposium as a very successful meeting to advance in this field, and I really do hope so. And well, that is all with me. So many thanks for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Maripa, and for your words. And now I will give the floor to Dr. Thibaudon. Michel is a past president of in the last symposium held in Lyon, and now is co-organizer of this 7th symposium. Thank you, Michel. It's your time.
Yes, thank you very much, Carmen, and thank you very much to all this organization committee. It is a pity for me not to be in Córdoba. For me, as you know, I like very much Córdoba. It may be the 5th time I will come if it was in Córdoba. I hope that this symposium will be very complicated. I know all the work, all the job that you, Carmen, and Peak Company, you make to try that this meeting, which will be the best. And I know, as we saw with you and Ingrida last year, that the topic of bioaerosol and environmental effect is very important. I think now I let you to continue in this Congress, and I am sure that you will success.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michel. And now I will give the floor to Dr. Saulin Ingrida, and that Ingrida is the president of the European Aerobiology Society and is also co-organizer in this symposium. Ingrida, your time.
Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends, Vice Chancellor of the University of Córdoba, Dean of Faculty of Science, and all who attend this opening ceremony. It's my pleasure to welcome you for joining this 7th virtual European Symposium on Aerobiology, and the 3rd since the European Aerobiology Society was held. The European Aerobiology Society is an international platform intended for the development of cooperation and sharing expertise in the field of aerobiology. Currently, the members of the European Aerobiology Society includes individuals and organizations from almost 28 countries. To know more about the European Aerobiology Society and how it was the life in the European Aerobiology Society, I invite all the members and ESA participants to join the European Aerobiology Society General Assembly on Thursday. And we can talk about society a bit more. Now going back to this, to the main part of the symposium, I am also want to mention that now we all experienced the unprecedented situation with the global COVID-19 pandemic. In the EAS board, we tried to be positive and in early spring moved the symposium date to November, believing deeply in the heart that situation will come better and we will meet in Cordoba face-to-face. As we see, the case is more complicated than we expected, and we have to learn to live without losing goals in conditions they are. I wish to convey my sincere appreciation to Carmen and all the local organization team and the university leaders as well for flexibility and preparing the European Symposium on Aerobiology to happen this week. We appreciate your huge effort to make this important event possible. I also thank participants for taking time to be together virtually in this symposium and share your research or discuss those done in different research groups. It is gratifying to know that the agenda of the symposium covers a wide range of very interesting items relating to aerobiology and its multidisciplinary approach. Today, knowledge of the composition of bioaerosol, its dynamic, and its effect on human health is more important than ever. Working together, we can make a significant influence on challenge and to mitigate these challenges. This credit our appetite to new stage of research and encourage us to be more involved in aerobiology. I hope that scientific discussion will be useful and productive. Your ideas and thoughts will be understood and applied in reality. I also want to indicate that the two groups of members of the European Aerobiology Society have been formed for the specific task during symposium. They will select the best oral presentation and the best poster presentation according to established criteria. And the winners will be announced during the closing ceremony of the symposium. So we believe that the symposium can become an opportunity for progress to all. I wish the participants of the symposium an abundance of new ideas, innovation, creative discussions, and tolerance in order to have their ideas recognized. Hope that this week will be fruitful on the scientific and cooperative sides.
Okay, Ingrida, thank you also for your word. And now I give the floor to the mayor of our city, Jose Maria Bellido. Jose Maria, thank you very much for being here, because we know that you have a very, very complicated agenda, but we are working with a very good relationship between the university and the government, the local government. Then it's a pleasure for me to present you. Jose Maria, when you want, you have.
Thank you, Carmen. I will speak in Spanish. En primer lugar, quiero dar la bienvenida virtual a Córdoba a todos los participantes en este Congreso de Aerobiología, una cita fundamental en estos tiempos marcados por la pandemia provocada por la COVID-19. Este 7º Simposio Europeo de Aerobiología debe ser una herramienta fundamental para aportar conocimiento y experiencias necesarias para hacer frente a desafíos clave en el futuro de España, de Europa y el conjunto del planeta. Es un profundo orgullo que Córdoba y el equipo de trabajo de aerobiología de la Universidad de Córdoba, con Carmen Galán al frente, sean parte fundamental de este encuentro. Hoy más que nunca tiene interés el trabajo desarrollado en torno a una ciencia multidisciplinar que estudia los microorganismos y las partículas biológicas transportadas por el aire. Este encuentro permite reunir a diferentes instituciones y asociaciones, todas dedicadas al estudio de la calidad del aire y a su impacto en los diferentes ecosistemas y en la salud humana, y ello bajo la dirección del talento y compromiso de la Universidad de Córdoba. Estaremos muy atentos a los trabajos que surjan de este simposio, que serán clave para interpretar la realidad medioambiental y los efectos sobre la salud de los organismos que se transmiten por el aire. Y también para sentar las bases del futuro trabajo que hemos de afrontar desde las administraciones, debatir asuntos de referencia en el futuro, como van a ser la lucha contra el cambio climático, la contaminación ambiental y el impacto que tendrá sobre la salud. Gracias a todos los que habéis hecho posible este simposio. Sus conclusiones son hoy, si cabe, todavía más importantes que nunca para proteger la salud humana y la del propio planeta. Muchas gracias y bienvenidos.
Muy bien. Muchas gracias a nuestro alcalde. Thank you very much to our mayor in the city of Córdoba. And then now I will give the floor to Dr. Quesada Enrique. Enrique is Vice Chancellor of Territorial Research and Development of the University of Córdoba. His background is close to the subject of this symposium. He is working on crop protection, agricultural entomology, and also in the use of entomopathogenic fungi for pest control. Today, he is representing to the rector, the principal, in the University of Córdoba. Then, Enrique, now is your time. Thank you.
Many thanks, Carmen, President of the Organizing Committee of this 7th virtual symposium of the European Aerobiology Society, dear Professor Galán, Mr. Mayor, dear Professor Aguilar, dear Professor Thibaudon, and dear Dr. Soulin. Welcome to the University of Córdoba. It is an honor for the University of Córdoba to host this important scientific event. 2 centuries of history endorse the trajectory of the University of Córdoba, which was founded as such in 1972, whereas it has its roots in the Free University that operated in the province of Córdoba at the end of the 19th century. Its youth and its average size, the UCO has around 21,000 students, a little more than 1,200 professors and around 700 workers, had given it the necessary dynamism to adapt and enter the 21st century as a university of high quality teaching and proven scientific solvency, as reflected in the 3 areas in which the UCO undertakes its activities, mainly food, agriculture, science and technology, humanities and legal and social sciences, and health sciences. Indeed, the University of Córdoba is one of the foremost research institutions in Spain, with emphasis in the agri-food field, as revealed by many rankings, including the Shanghai one. Professor Galán Group stands out in the international context for its work in the field of aerobiology, both at the basic and applied levels. Indeed, I have learned of Professor Galán how important may be the impact of research transfer in aerobiology in different areas. And this Congress is a culmination and recognition of the activity of this group. Recognition also shown by the inaugural lecture given by Professor Domínguez. I wish you a great Congress, full of scientific creativity and collaborations. And I urge you also to visit our beautiful city and our great university in the nearest possible future. Welcome to the University of Córdoba. Have a good meeting. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Enrique. And now I thank you again, all of you, for your presence in the welcome ceremony. During this week, we will have the opportunity to update all together the state of the art in aerobiology in different sessions. They are focused on different topics. All of you will follow the broadcast of the symposium through your personal area in the link that the PIC company offered to you. We also have a Zoom for session, for lecturer, moderator, and also for author presenting the poster and oral communication. Please, I encourage all of you to respect the time you have in your sessions, okay, during this week. Before closing ceremony, I remember you that at 2:30 p.m., Dr. Dominguez will present the inaugural lecture for this symposium. Dr. Fregueli will present to him, but I would like to say before that Eugenio is my mentor on botany and also on aerobiology from the beginning of my career. And he's also the mentor of many aerobiologists in Spain. He has been pioneer in aerobiology and founder of the Spanish Aerobiology Network in 1992. And it is a network in the frame of the Spanish Association for Aerobiology. I take advantage to say welcome to Estela Moreno as president of this association, and of course, also to Dorota Mikowska as president of the International Association for Aerobiology. Then, with this word, we are closing the open ceremony. Thank you very much.
Pepe, ecco. Sì, ok. Okay,
Sí. Hay mucho ruido, ¿eh? Mucho ruido de fondo. ¿Comparto ya la pantalla? ¿Perdón? Sí, vale, de acuerdo. De acuerdo, bien, ahora es cuando te oigo bien. Vale.
Okay.
Vale.
Sí. Ok.
Espera.
Ok, 1 minute. Yes, okay. Good evening to everybody. I am pleased to open this scientific session of the 7th Congress of European Society of Aerobiology. And I'd like to introduce Professor Eugenio Dominguez as first speaker of this scientific session.
No sound. No sound.
Okay. I'd like to remember that the first advanced aerobiological course was organized in 1994 in Cordoba by Eugenio, together with Paolo Mandrioli, cum toi. After which many further aerobiological meetings followed together with Eugenio, basic and advanced courses around the world. This all before he started to be more dedicated to academic business in the university in the late 90s. Rector of Cordoba University, advisor to the Spanish Ministry of Environment, and more recently, rector of the International University of Andalusia, and a lot of other mandates at university. But the passion for aerobiological studies has remained the same over the years. And recently, we were part of many doctoral committees in aerobiology. And then I think I just remember that Eugenio is a big fan and authority in aviation, as I discovered when he took me to visit in Houston at the Space Center in the 1996. Perhaps this is the reason of the topic chosen for his presentation, the use of aerial platforms in aerobiological studies. 16 years later, the drones invasion. Eugenio, you are welcome.
¿Sí? ¿Sí? Sí, puedo compartir ya la pantalla. Puedo compartir ya la pantalla, ¿verdad? No, no me deja. No.
Sí,
el anfitrión,
puede compartir la pantalla.
No, me dice que inhabilitó la función de compartir pantalla de todos los participantes.
Ya.
Ahora sí, ahora sí. Ahora sí. Un segundo. Un segundito. And here we are. Cominciamo. Prima di tutto voglio ringraziare l'amico Beppe Frengueli per la sua presentazione. Grazie Beppe. Dear colleagues, In July 2004, I got the honor to give one of the plenary lectures of the 11th IPC Congress held in Granada. In this occasion, I started this lecture remembering that from the very beginning, research devoted to the aerobiology sciences have shown a particular interest in the phenomena by which microscopic organisms are liberated at ground level, disseminated in the air, and transported by means of earth stream to the uppermost layer of the atmosphere, from where they are dispersed to different and often very distant places. Charles Blackley, the aerobiology pioneer, already tried to use some type of area platform to be able to obtain better sampling results. That at the ground level, in this case, using kites to elevate the pollen catcher slide to some altitude, more or less 500 meters. The collection of particles at different altitudes has always been considered an essential aspect of aerobiology, making it necessary to use diverse types of aero platforms. At times, however, the results of these early experiments were far from satisfactory. Not because of the platform per se, as Mayen claimed in 1967, but rather due to the ineffective sampling method employed. Method which did not take into account the aerodynamic phenomena produced by the platform as they move through the air. Existing spore sampling devices are normally stationary at the sampling location, an important issue, and prevailing climatic conditions and use of sampling devices in remote and in place with severe topography is almost impossible. In such scenarios, airborne sampling has been suggested by several authors as a viable alternative. Today, we're able to achieve good results at considerably high altitude with the use of both balloons, now filled with helium instead of the hazardous and flammable hydrogen, and high-performance samplers in spite of limitations that prevent the use in certain types of aerobiology sampling. Steinman, in 1923, was the first to use an aircraft to perform microbiological studies on the atmosphere and collect fungal spores at altitude of about 16,500 feet in Texas, Wyoming, and Nebraska. The first samples were made exposing sample microscope slides smeared with Vaseline by means of two methods. One, with the operator seated in the passenger cockpit of the plane to expose the slide by hand and then returning it to the slide box, or placing inside a bottle a microscope slide attached to a wooden paddle, the upper part of which extended through the hole in the core of the bottle and served as a handle. After the slide had been exposed, it was again placed in the bottle. In this way, obviating the necessity of opening the slide box was a method rather cumbersome, as it was necessary to carry as many bottles as slides were exposed, as Steinman pointed out in one of his papers. A more practical method, it was carried out by a laboratory technician that make a new spore trap consisting of a battery of traps opened or closed by a manual mechanism and installed on a wing more or less far from the influx of propeller turbulence. Steinman said about the airplanes probably will be useful in studying the dissemination of spore and probably will aid in the solution of problems connected with the development of epidemic of plant disease. In fact, he successfully demonstrated that Puccinia graminis spores were able to cross the Great Plain from north to south without much difficulties. This discovery was known as the Puccinia pathway. Clearly, the system to collect samples continued to be rather rudimentary, employing either microscope slides smeared with Vaseline, which were exposed by hand from the cockpit, or photographic slide cases containing 2 to 4 plates smeared with Vaseline fixed in a brass clamp on the upper wing above the cockpit, or spheroidal similar to those that had been used by Statman. The condition in which those men worked were described in a paper by George Walker in 1935, who, with the aid of General MacArthur interested in this work for obvious strategic reasons, was permitted to perform studies at altitude about 2,000 feet, using the newly acquired by the U.S. Army Air Service, the Martin Bomber B-10. Walker collects spore by exposing a guard petri dish in front of the wingstring of the plane. He described the technique in this way. Cultures were taken every 1,000 feet, the wing coming in contact with the plate and with my hand at a velocity of 150 kilometers per hour. About 70,000 cubic feet of air pass over the plate in 1 minute. The calculated temperature at 28,500 feet was 34 degrees Fahrenheit below zero. My hand soon became so numb and stiff that I could not carry out the technique as I planned it. The result of that experiment was so poor that Walker himself voiced the need to develop some type of sampling device that would not require the human handling. In the 30th decade, Fred Campbell Mayer, the father of the term aerobiology, appeared on the scene. And with the help of the United States of Agriculture, he became the main proponent of aerial platform in aerobiology studies. Mayer have a good relation with the U.S. Army Air Force, the U.S. Navy, and the U.S. Coast Guard, as well, and this is important, with Juan Tripp, the founder of Pan Am Airlines, that provides him the opportunity to collect samples at high altitudes using a wide range of airplanes, balloons, and airships, including the airship USS Los Angeles, which he used in his flight during the winter of 1931, developing a technique for collecting the live organisms that later could be transported to the laboratory for studies. On the other hand, Mayer's friendship with the famous aviator Charles Lindbergh and Amelia Earhart, giving him the opportunity to carry out a study in the farther corners of the planet, carrying also of sampling during their record flight. In this book, Amelia Earhart described the petition that she received from Fred Campbell Mayer in one of the records, trying to give the around of the world flight with a plane. And she wrote, La criatura, the back that I need to fish was a microorganism for Fred Campbell Mayer. One of the devices developed for this flight was the skyhook that was designed by Mayer himself with Lindbergh help and used it in the Lindbergh 1933 transatlantic flight to map out the new air route for Pan Am flying in the Lohis Sirius Timisaartok, in Inuit language, the one that flies like a big bird, in a flight covering more than 45,000 kilometers. The spacecraft built in a single night by the American Instrument Company in Washington, D.C., consisted of an aluminum rod that projected vertically out of the pilot cabin at a height of some 2 or 3 feet. At one of the rod, cartridge containing a slide with a sticky surface were fastened to a handle on the rod, and the slide were exposed for 30 minutes as they flew over Greenland. The full result of that experiment, however, will never be known to us, although they were not precise enough to be published. But they did prove that the atmosphere contained numerous living organisms, at least in the air mass surrounding the aircraft. In One of the papers published by Charles Limbeth and Anne Moore Rimbeth in the National Society of Geography, they also pointed out that the result will be published forthcoming. Unfortunately, Meyer disappeared in what could be the first airplane hijacking in the story, when flying over the Pacific in the Martin M130 Hawaii Clipper. Some months later, Proctor and Parker designed what they called the bioaerocollector, a development of the skyhook, a sample that could itself eliminate the possible risk of contamination of other devices and be transported to the laboratory to analyze the viable spot that had been collected. The sampler consisted of a copper plate with a 6-hole that contained a microscope slide, circular in shape, and changeable from the standby position to the collection position using a wheel. The air passed through the holes that were opened and closed, sent to a device located at the end of the road, protruding out of the plane's cabin on probably a Martin B-10 of the US Weather Service of Boston. In 1948, Polonin designed a new collector for an expedition to the North Pole. Built at McGill University, the collector was mounted on a Boeing B-29 Superfortress and consisted of a 30-centimeter long steel rod installed on one of the front windows of the plane and fastened to the fuselage. The back part of the rod could be blocked by a type of rifle bolt. A second rod, some 68 centimeters in length and somewhat narrower than the first, could be sealed at both ends, permitting the easy insertion of petri dish. At the same time, the nose of the airplane contained a series of holes leading to tubes that electrostátically filtered viable and non-viable matter. According to our data, airships have been and still are used in some cases in aerobiology studies. Going back in the history, one of these was the disastrous flight managed by the Italian pilot Umberto Nobile, that in 1928 made a flight over polar territory. In one of his books, Nobile described how Professor Casagrandi of the Institute of Health at the University of Padua proposed mounting on the airship a sampler capable of analyzing the bacteriological content of the air of the pole by means of filters. Unfortunately, because they were unable to design the apparatus in time, they were forced to use vacuum bottles that were opened during the flight. This, added to the fact that the airship crashed during its flight, gives no record of the experiment outcome. As you can see in the letter that the Nobile wife wrote me some years ago. As Lacey and McCartney have pointed out, at that time in the history of aerobiology, 1999, it was the inefficiency of the samplers and not the platform per se that prevents to achieve scientifically standardized result. And it was until 1966 when Timon, Fulton, and Mitchell designed and used a genuine isokinetic sampler. The system, which was very simple and easy to handle, was mounted on the nose of a Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress of a North American B-25 mission and consisted of a 1.5 meter long rod with a mechanism at one end sending air to a plate containing soluble gelatin foam filters. The rod was connected to a vacuum pump with a suction rate of 52 liters per minute, flying at a speed of 290 kilometers per hour and performed efficiently at any altitude or any temperature. From then, several isokinetic samples have been designed, and in an international workshop held in Leipzig in 2002, these state-of-the-art isokinetic samplers were studied and appropriate recommendations were made for their use. So what the problem of the sampler? Anyway, it's quite heavy yet. So heavy that they need adequate flat platform to take to the air. Some problems rest unresolved. 1, altitude of sampling. 2, endurance of platform flights, and many other ones. Until now, not many years ago, both samplers and platforms were very sophisticated devices and expensive to operate. This is the case, for example, of impactor mounted on modified planes such as the Ilyushin 18 Candid Cyclone and the Antonov 12 BKT Cyclone, or those used in an Italian airplane, less sophisticated and less costly, the Partenavia P-68, that, however, have got the penalty of its short range and altitude achieved. Nevertheless, all these airplanes are other ones cannot collect samples at height of 20 kilometers or more. That's making impossible the study phenomena in the upper troposphere and in the lower stratosphere, in which important physiochemical processes occur regarding the long-distance transport that the living organism, microorganisms, can be transported. As a consequence, curiously, of the Cold War, during the last half of the 20th century, the Soviet Union designed and made a spy plane, the Myasishchev M17 Mystic, at the very beginning, a high altitude interceptor, but some years later, converted into one of the less costly planes in the world for the study of stratospheric phenomena. It was the N-55 Geophysica. Equipped with a wide range of atmospheric samplers, this aircraft can remain in flight more than 4 hours and at altitude of some 65,000 feet. The Western counterpart to the M55 was the Lockheed ER-2, another product of the Cold War, the U-2. Let me talk now about the eruption of the drones. Strictly speaking, unmanned aerial vehicles are remotely piloted aircraft that can carry payload such as cameras, sensors, and communication equipment. All flight operations are performed without a human pilot on board and with a fundamental feature. They are designed to return to base after its mission. In the media, it's often used the term drone, which is the one that has become popular for the great public. Their missions are to perform critical flight operations without risk to personnel and in a comparatively more cost-effective manner than the mentioned managed system. The first study of the use of the managed aerial vehicles in aerobiology appears in Godwell and Tedros in 1985. In it, they describe a spore and pollen trap for use on aerial remotely piloted vehicles. The paper provides an excellent description of the design and tests when using drones. In this research, spore trap samplers were mounted between the fuselage and wing tips, and you can see in that slide, thus permitting time stamping samples at different locations. The system used a molded plastic spore trap housing a clear Melinex tape coated with adhesive. After sampling, the tails were removed from the ground for microscope slide. Sport traps and bacon maneuvering were activated and controlled remotely from the ground by a person. This paper can be considered as an extension of the one written by Gottwald and Tedder in 1985, but the mentioned previously concentrated on introducing autonomous flight, wind tunnel tests, and monitoring kinetic conditions at drone speed using a pump. Aerial drones, or air drones, as you want to say, can be classified in two different categories. Fixed wing, mainly used for sampling over long distance, and rotary wing used on localized studies. The latter has clear advantage in terms of maneuverability, cost, and clientless. Also, the use of electricity power engine that avoid potential contamination sources that usually come from diesel or gasoline engines. All aerial drones shows a clear improvement of flight performance with the number of rotors. However, the opposite trend was observed for new drone models furnished with a relatively low number of rotors, as you can see in this slide. We must to say that the use of multiple rotors located at the periphery, equidistant around a central core, allows the allocation of sampling system on the center of the crash, far away from potential turbulence and interference. The great development of GPS precision, miniaturization, and the use of long-life batteries has allowed to obtain better results in the use of drones as aerobiological platforms. Tommaso Villa and collaborator in 2016 have summarized the actual situation in relation to the application of drones in aerobiological studies, pointed out that the reduced size, weight, and power, along with the reduced cost of the platform and instrumentation, make them highly suitable for these operations. And manned aircraft encompass a wide range of different platforms, which, due to their physical size and power, differs in terms of their capability and simplicity of operation. This factor impact the payload carrying capacity, speed, altitude, and range of flight, which determine the different applications that can be performed by each type of EAB. Even though the small drones are subject to significant payload restriction compared to large manned aircraft, they have distinct advantages over the manned counterparts. In terms of relatively low platform cost, capability to perform autonomous flight operation from takeoff to landing, and to fly closer to the ground with no risk for a manned crew. Pre-programmed flight plans can be issued and automatically controlled on board, which means that small drones can be flown with greater accuracy and less workload than aircraft with human operators. Some platforms even can work in an environment without GPS channel and or to follow local linear infrastructures without the use of a GPS, and therefore could provide efficient and accurate monitoring inside building, forest, or canyon. So we can conclude that exists yet a number of challenges that may move the science community towards a widespread use of UAVs for air quality measurement. In addition, limitations such as flight time, sample integration, and limited autonomy are driving research into the use of small UAVs. Because of that, there is a long way still to run. Lately, an innovation very useful for aerial sampling has been described and it's the use of hybrid energy drones. This is a name very difficult to say. Bucomberan and collaborated in 2019 pointed out the increased endurance and achievement of good performance of UAVs using hybrid power supply system architecture, fuel cell battery, solar cell, or supercapacitor. The choice of a suitable power source hybridization architecture with an optimal energy management system are therefore crucial to enable an efficient operation of advanced drones. The next context of battery-powered UAV platform includes technology still not very well developed, such as swapping, laser beam insight, recharging, and tethering. Finally, we cannot forget the possibility that opened up with the use of autonomous area platform or the use of one of many drones that will allow the analysis of large areas at different altitudes and obtain very precise model of the dispersion and dynamic of biological particles in the air. An example of this is described by Friesen and collaborators in 2016, applying drones to phenological studies linked to the process of release of pollen by plants. In this case, aerial surveys conducted at different times during plant flowering provide valuable information on difference in phenology for different areas of the study region. My dissertation can be finished with the conclusions of Tommaso. UAVs could offer high-resolution spatiotemporal sampling, which is not possible or feasible with manned aircraft, by taking into account that some drone systems are more flexible than others. When taking into account the type of sampling to be installed in the drone, the future of UAVs for using air quality application is promising, thanks to the capability and flexibility of the robotic platform. But questions still need to be addressed regarding the miniaturization of sampling devices, which seem to be the main issue when working with lightweight drones. In fact, the diverse range of drone payload capacity is primarily made by the difference between rotary and fixed-wing UAVs. The key limiting factors in new sensor development include power, mass, and size, because they are intimately connected to the range, to the type of platform, rotary instead of fixed wing, engine, electricity or gas operated, and type of mission. Speed, longer distance with low altitude, rather than flight stability, and low speed for a higher spatial resolution. And not forgetting, of course, the strict civil aviation regulation that do not permit the flight of this type of machine in regulated spaces. Thank you very much for your attention.
Many thanks. Thank you very much, Eugenio, for your very nice speech that reminded us the origin of aerobiological monitoring and its evolution to drone, which could be on future, at least in some areas of aerobiology, could be applied on a wide scale. Thank you very much.
Grazie, Pepe.
taking this opportunity. First, I am express my personal thanks to Professor Eugenio Dominguez for very interesting journey in the experience of area of platforms for the use in aerobiological study. Thank you so much. And now it's my pleasure to announce the keynote speaker. After a moment, the speech, Bioaerosol and Health Impact will start. This topic is the topic of the symposium and the essential field for biology. Highlights in this topic, we will hear from the outstanding person who have a huge influence on progress in aerobiology. He's co-founder of European Aerobiology Society, the past president of the European Aerobiology Society, is one of the very best speakers, and many more titles can be added, but now it's time for keynote speech. Dear Michel Thibaudon, we are focused and concentrated towards bioaerosol and health impact. The floor is yours. On the bottom, somewhere share the screen.
Hello, do you see my presentation?
Perfect.
Yeah?
Yes.
Can I start it?
Yes, you can start. Yeah, your presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much to Ingrid and to Carmen to ask me to make a keynote during this. Oh, there is two sounds different. Hope that it will be good now. Thanks to Ingrid and Carmen to ask me to make a presentation, a keynote about bioaerosol and health impact in a congress which the title is Bioaerosol and Environmental Impacts. And it's very important for me that to be sure that human is in the environment, and we cannot differentiate human and environment. So, what is a bioaerosol? A bioaerosol is an aerosol that is or comes from a living microorganism or microorganism. in a broad sense, and in many publications, biology key derived from toxin, bacteria, viruses, fungal spore, animal and plant cell. Pollens are always out of the means of bioaerosol because pollens cannot multiply. Airborne cellular fragments and waste are classified as a bioaerosol. But in our topic, we always have pollen in bioaerosol. Another definition is bioaerosol are biogenic organic molecules or airborne microorganisms ubiquitous in our environment. The majority of bioaerosols are of size that makes them inhalable, ranging them from 0.02 or 0.25 micrometer for viruses, 0.3 to 10 or 15 micrometers for bacteria, 1 to 10 micrometers for molds, fungal spore, and yeast, and 10 to 100 micrometer for pollen grain. Most naturally occurring bacteria do not cause adverse health impacts in humans. Some are even essential to the human organism as well to the environment. Health risks arise when concentration of some species become abnormally high, and some airborne bacteria are recognized as a source of infectious disease. For mold, fungal spore, and yeast, the ambient concentration doesn't cause health impact in the majority of people. However, in situations where these concentrations are abnormally high, or for some people with respiratory problems or a weakened immune system, exposure to mold, fungal spore, can lead to the development of symptoms and disease. The effect experienced depends on the species present, their metabolic products, and the concentration and duration of the exposure, and the individual susceptibility. The main health impacts associated with mold exposure are hypersensitivity, allergy, toxicosis, infection, and irritation. And with this fungal spore, there is always a lot of mycotoxins. During the process of nutrient degradation, molds release secondary metabolites called mycotoxin, which serve as a defense against other microorganisms, including other molds. In particular, the role of mycotoxin is recognized in humans in the development of diffuse interstitial lung disease. It is a real problem. Endotoxin also. Endotoxin are constituents of the outer cells of membrane gram-negative bacteria. They consist of liposaccharide associated with protein and lipids. The health effects vary greatly depending on the species, individual, dose, and route of entry. Symptoms reported following respiratory exposure to endotoxin include cough, shortness of breath, fever, lung obstruction and inflammation, and gastrointestinal problems. And virus, actuality, virus. To live, reproduce, and spread, viruses require a living host cell. They can be aerosolized by droplets from infected individuals, but they are quickly inactivated in the ambient environment. The presence of symptom or illness in the host is a sufficient proof of their presence, and we see this problem actually. I want to show now some last recent publication. It was difficult for this presentation to speak about the past. I want to speak about the recent, and I select some recent publication of different teams. And for instance, for the exposure to biological particles and allergy, I want to speak about first about the long-term effect. For instance, this publication of Marchetti and al. In 2017 about pollen concentration and prevalence of asthma and allergic rhinitis in Italy. Evidence from the big study, which is the GIANT study. The risk of developing allergic rhinitis is not increased when living in a place where pollen are particularly abundant. It is probably even decreased. It is very interesting because that can be shows that there is a little immunotherapy with pollen. In short-term effects, the dose-response relationship varies according to the allergen considered, depending on its concentration and different from one population to another, from one region to another. It is, for instance, a publication of Kustovic in 2015. To what extent is allergen exposure a risk factor for the development of allergic disease? It is a very interesting publication in clinical and experimental allergy. In the BMG Open, the publication of Kitinoja in 2020, short-term exposure to pollen and the risk of allergic and asthmatic manifestation, a systematic review and meta-analysis. And this is interesting because we can see that the relationship between short-term exposure to pollen and the risk of allergic asthmatic manifestation is still largely unknown. It is very interesting because there is a lot of work to do still. An example about ragweed from Johns Hall in 2019 in a publication, Ragweed Pollen and Allergic Symptoms in Children, result from a 3-year longitudinal study. It is interesting because there is some people in this publication from UK, Croatia, and Australia. There is no threshold for triggering symptoms. The very first grades are already susceptible to pollinosis. The risks are by no means linearly associated with pollen concentration, depending on the target organ, eye, nose, or lung. The body's response time is not at all the same, and it is a very individual dependent. It is very, very important to see this, and even if the maximum risk is always in plateau. Here it is a presentation of Elbas and Hall in 2018. Outdoor pollen is a trigger of child and adolescent asthma emergency. Department presentation, systematic review, and still also a meta-analysis. And there is an existence of positive statistically significant correlation between pollen exposure and the use of hospital emergency within 3 days. And it is very, very important in this. So I want to show you a work that we do with the Austrian team of Vienna, the whole team of Siegfried Jäger, which is now the team of Uwe Berger and Maximilian Basel, and the use of a pollen diary. And it is, we can use it since 2009, and there is more than 350,000 users in all Europe. The more are in Germany than in Australia, France, and other countries. Remember, for those who don't know, who know it, that it is a system by web or by app, and you have to log in you must enter every day the symptom and the level of your symptom about eyes, nose, lungs that you have, and the drugs that you can take. And you can have a visualization, for instance, every day if you want, or for a long period like this. You can see all in red the symptoms that you upload, and you can see that you can see about, for instance, alder pollen, birch pollen, and grasses pollen. It is very interesting to see that there is always a correlation between the exposure and the health impact. This a fever diary has a benefits for research because the symptom data adds to the understanding of the impact of pollination and pollen allergy sufferers. There may be also some comparison with air quality data, and it is also used to define pollen season. And there is a variability, and we can see that it is very different from one patient to another patient. And this also allows the assessment of the severity of a pollen season. We can see that we have a difference of pollen exposure from one year to another, but there is also a difference of health impact. With the pollen fever diary, there is a lot of publication. I select only a few of them. For instance, the publication about the grass pollen season in 2015, a proof of concept multi-approach study in 3 different European cities. And there is also in the Journal of Medicine Intern Research original paper. And symptom data adds to the understanding of the impact of pollination on pollen allergy sufferers. Yes, in environmental pollution, a very big journal, there is a publication about impact of air pollution on symptom severity during the birch, grass, and ragweed pollen period in Vienna, Austria, and the importance of ozone in between the period 2010 and 2018. And there is also a publication in Science of the Dental Environment about the first comparison of symptom data with allergen content and pollen data. It is a work that we do, a very large European project ILI. And it is to show in this publication that symptom data can be compared with pollen, allergen, and air quality data. In the benefits, symptom data helps also to define a pollen season. And if there is a publication also about in environmental pollution, if we can improve pollen season definition by using symptom loads and index, in addition to pollen counts, the position paper of Yaki, which was directed by Oliver Farr, and a lot of us work in this for this position paper, which title defining pollen exposure times for clinical trials of allergen immunotherapy for pollen-induced rhinoconjunctivitis. And to finish, symptoms that allows the assessment of the severity of pollen season. To define the difference of one pollen season to other pollen season, there is a publication of in Aerobiology, but also in the World Allergy Organization journal. It's a very recent publication, which is important. In second point, there is a role of joint exposure to pollen and other particulate matter. For instance, in the publication Enrich in 2019, intituled in Allergo Journal Internet, Air Pollutants and Primary Allergy Prevention, living in a polluted environment does not predispose to becoming allergic to pollen in any way. But once this predisposition is acquired, which is fundamentally multifactorial, and once the allergy is installed, environmental pollution is a serious factor for the increase of the impact factor. In 2020, a recent publication in UIACI from Burt et al., long-term air pollution exposure is associated with increased severity of rhinitis in 2 European big cohorts. It's a very, very large cohort with a lot of people, of very important persons, scientists. Long-term air pollution exposure is associated with increased severity of rhinitis in 2 European cohorts. In particular, living in a polluted environment with PM10, PM2.5, and NO2 enhanced the severity of allergic rhinitis. But another publication of subtle, for instance, of Holstrup, subtle and complex interaction between gaseous pollutants, chemical particles, and biological particles. And this publication in 2019 in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, which is a very important journal also, is a simultaneous inclusion of NOx, ozone, PM10, and betula pollen as on the exacerbation of respiratory disease, an effect 13% higher than the sum of those that would be obtained by considering these 4 parameters separately. Is that we call in France, but I think not only in France, that's a cocktail effect. And it is very important to have always this in mind. Finally, which is the role of pollen as a vector for other particles? I select a publication of Rosendal 2019. Artemisia pollen is the main vector for airborne endotoxin in UIACI. High concentration of endotoxin from 2 genera of bacteria, Pseudomonas and Plantera, which may persist for a long time in the environment, cause an inflammatory and or immunological response, and when they are airborne, cause respiratory allergies. The allergy risk associated with pollen from didn't depend essentially on the presence of the abundance of Pseudomonas and Plantera. It is very interesting to show that the role of carrier of some pollen. But pollen cannot carry a viral particle. It is the last publication, which was disseminated largely in our community from Dunkirk, which is in press about COVID-19. And this publication will be in Science of the Total Environment, and the title is No SARS-CoV-2 detected in air samples, pollen and particulate matter in Leipzig during the first spread. And it's very important because a lot of things was said about these possibilities. So, in conclusion, bioaerosols are always present in the air we breathe. It's normal. Often without any health impact is normal. But sometimes, with many diseases as infection, irritation, allergy, but always with an individual sensibility. We must be careful with the fake news, even the fake publication you have seen. For instance, for COVID-19, we can see that there are in the world more than billions and billions of epidemiologists. And as you can see, the publication, even if very big journal as Lancet or Nature and so on, that after there is some modification. Thank you very much for your attention. I want to thank for the help for this lecture, this keynote, Jean-Pierre Besancenot, which is our mentor in France, and Maximilian Basel, who helped me for this publication in Australia. Have a nice Congress.
Thank you, Michel, for the presentation. There is no questions because I feel that presentation was very interesting, and everyone wants to catch each of your words and do not spend time for the writing. So in the post, there is no question, so it's not necessary to answer.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. I have the great pleasure of introducing Professor Giuseppe Frengueli with the title of Professor written in capital letters, as he is one of the first teachers of most aerobiologists in the world who participated in the international courses of aerobiology. I have known him for a long time, during the basic course of the year 1995, and he has my admiration for the last 25 years as a teacher, researcher, and especially as a person. The new lesson that Professor Frengueli will bring us today deals about the application of the aerobiological studies in agriculture and forestry. Please, Professor, it will be a pleasure for us.
Thank you very much, Javier, for your kind presentation. And I like, first of all, to take this opportunity to compliment the organizers of this Congress. Thank you to Carmen, Ingrid, Michelle, and all those who have contributed to realize this meeting in this difficult period. Okay, this is my speech is about agriculture and forestry. And I like to begin my speech, remember that the last report to the high-level panel of experts on food security and nutrition established to advise the UN Committee on World Food Security that the global food systems are at a crossroads, and agroecological approaches and other innovations for sustainable agriculture are required as soon as possible, given that agricultural expansion is the main driver of deforestation. The biggest transformational change is needed in the way in which we produce and consume food. In addition, the goal number one of the United Nations Strategic Plan for Forest is to reverse the loss of forest cover worldwide through sustainable forest management, including protection, restoration, afforestation, reforestation, and increased effort to prevent forest degradation and contribute to the global effort of addressing climate change. We must move away from the current situation where the demand for food is resulting in inappropriate agricultural practices that drive large-scale conversion of forests to agricultural production and the loss of forest related to biodiversity. And then we think that adopting agroforestry and sustainable agriculture, but also restoring the productivity of degraded agricultural lands, are just some of the actions that urgently need to be scaled up. Agroforestry is a land use management system in which trees or shrubs are grown around or among crops or pasture land. And this intentional combination of agriculture and forestry has multiple benefits, such as the greatly enhanced yield from basic food crops, enhanced farmer livelihood from income generation, increased biodiversity, improved soil structure and health, reduction erosion and carbon sequestration. Moreover, sustainable agriculture provides a potential solution to enable agricultural systems to feed a growing population within the changing environmental conditions. Sustainable agriculture is farming in sustainable ways, which means meeting society's present food needs without compromising the ability for current or future generations to meet their needs. But today, we talk about precision agriculture, which is a whole farm management approach using information technology, satellite positioning data, remote sensing, and proximal data gathering. It implies a management strategy to increase productivity and economic return with a reduced impact on the environment. In other words, it's a way to apply the right treatment in the right place at the right time. In this scenario, aerobiology may be a good tool to improve the fight against plant diseases. Using remote sensing and spore trapping system techniques for the airborne pathogen identification, together with aerobiological models based on phenological observation to rationalize and reduce the use of chemical for crop protection, and at the same time, it is possible to adopt a new solution aiming at optimized production. In addition, aerobiology can also contribute to the improvement of biogeographical and ecological information of vegetation, the forest health and the vitality, being important for the protection of plant biodiversity. In this recent and interesting review published by Santo Temkiv, Sikoparia, and the other authors, published in this year, this paper contains a brief reviews of outdoor field bioaerosol research from a wide range of basic and applied scientific disciplines, with emphasis on perspective from the atmospheric sciences. And according to these authors, one of the research topics in which bioaerosol field measurement is important include agriculture. I think the aerobiology in plant pathology is the main subject, and also I think the oldest subject that interested aerobiology, the study on aerobiology. Because the main research on urban fungal spore relate to diseases on cultivated plants, the dynamics of spread, appearance, and recurrence of a phytopathogenic with serious damage to agricultural areas. Control of many plant diseases is mostly achieved through fungicide application, independently of significant risk of disease, and growers often anticipate that the disease by means of a routine application of fungicides at very high rates and for short intervals throughout the growing season. This is today an unsustainable situation that is now being questioned. Careless or excessive use of pesticides can result in poor control, crop damage, higher expenses, and hazard to health and the environment. Then a more rational approach based on measured data, such as the amount of pathogen in the air and the probability of infection by the pathogen based on weather conditions, could help growers in rationalizing their practices and thus can lead to a reduction in the number of fungicide applications and their environmental impact. The bioaerosol studies and the aerobiological models could possibly lead to a 50% reduction in fungicide application worldwide. Very important in this last here, the application of the geographical information system and its application to a network of samplers can allow a greater prediction of airborne inoculum and dispersal dynamics. And this field of technology is now developing quickly as novel diagnostic methods allow increasingly rapid and accurate quantification of airborne species and genetic traits. A lot of papers have been published about the prediction of pathogen incursion in many parts of the world. So, for example, this is from in North America area, published by Isard and collaborator, about the warning system that can detect the disease at the point of infection up to 3 weeks before the symptoms are seen. This early notice will enable farmers to optimize their disease control programs, increasing yield and also profitability. The US Department of Agriculture founded in 2004 an innovative soybean rust website, which includes a vigilant continental scale disease monitoring network, coupled with guidelines for efficacious fungicide management practices. And in order to manage sustainable crop health, predictive tools can help growers in rationalizing their practices. And these tools include aerobiological models that forecast the arrival of spores in areas where susceptible crops are grown. And they are highly dependent on accurate knowledge of the geographic distribution and intensity of fungal spores. And then, since fungi are common in indoor and outdoor environment, more or less 25% of people worldwide have a fungal allergy or other diseases that may also affect animals. And the adverse health effects may also result from exposure to mycotoxin, we have seen before with Michelle, which are produced by some fungi, and such as Aspergillus or Fusarium and many others, and are found throughout the agriculture industry and the production of agricultural commodities. Moreover, there is a wide variety of respiratory hazards, such as organic dust, molds and spores, bacteria, mice, in agriculture workplace. Working environments can vary markedly between farms, and exposure can also be affected by climate, which influences infestation of crops or animal feed and chemical use. In some recent studies, we have seen that the large contribution of agriculture to fine particulate matter air pollution and the public health impact on neighboring residents of farm. Air pollutant emission from livestock farms are associated with a reduced lung function level in non-farming resident of a rural area. Exposure assessment and surveillance are needed to better characterize exposure and adverse health effect in farming. And among general preventive measures are routinely detection of airborne dust and microorganisms in working environment could be an additional and valid measure against respiratory disease among agricultural workers. But aerobiology is also applied to forest monitoring. And we have a lot of studies that emphasize the vulnerability of forests to the environmental change impacts, linking it to climate change or to biological and anthropological factors, such as wildfire, pests, diseases, adverse weather events. And airborne pollen could be a powerful tool to monitoring of forest ecosystem health and study environmental changes, especially the vegetation distribution. Agriculture sector is responsible for more or less 70% of deforestation worldwide, while an increase in forest area may occur through natural expansion of forests. Main goal of forest disease management is to reduce economic, biological, and biodiversity loss caused by plant parasites. And the many strategies used can be grouped under two main actions, prevention and therapy. About prevention, we know models that are normally used to extend the understanding of plant disease epidemiology on a number of fronts, providing an opportunity for a more rational use of resources on expensive field trials and representing a step towards more sustainable control measures. But from a therapy point of view, current efforts by scientists have focused on developing disease management concepts in order to balance the benefit of pesticide with the ecological concern of the residue contaminating the environment. Fungicide used in large scale can lead to disbalances of mineral nutrients in the soil and the pollution of water sources. And then I think their use is acceptable only for individual control of valuable trees in countryside and in urban areas. Therefore, it seems that the only possibility to preserve trees in forests is searching and breeding individuals with increased genetic resistance to pathogens. Forests are particularly sensitive to environmental changes because of their low adaptation capacity to several factors. And then long-term airborne pollen monitoring data provide relevant information on the vulnerability of the species in response to the environmental changes. Thus, the aerobiological analysis can be considered as a climate indicator. Many studies on European forest ecosystems found interesting differences in the response to these changes. For example, an increase normally in the northern regions and a decrease in the southern eastern regions of Europe. But in natural forests in South America, for example, Araucaria angustifolia has become a critically endangered species during the last century with a remarkable decrease in its seed production and the distribution area. And Fabiana Latorre and her collaborator published in this year a very interesting paper about this problem in southern Brazil and the northeastern of Argentina. And they report that the limitation for the reproductive success may be associated with the low number of airborne pollen grains available for fertilization, and thus the low cross-pollination ratio. The air transport of its pollen is limited due to the big size of the grains, of course, but also by unfavorable atmospheric and climatic conditions, above all high temperature. that prevail in the subtropical forest. And we know, of course, that if fertilization is limited, a smaller number of seed will be produced. But we must keep in mind that airborne pollen changes over time are very nice bioindicators of the plant response to the climate and environmental condition where they live. And then an increase of air temperature involves many aspects of plant phenology, such as the behavior of pollen release, the length of the pollen season, and many other parameters. In a different place. In the warmer part, for example, in the warmer parts of the Mediterranean, such as in Tunisia, the critical import possible lack of winter chill could determine a late and poor blooming. Many trees, such as almond and pistachios, are thus unable to fulfill their chilling needs and do not produce sufficient pollen and economically viable yields, or even fail to break out dormancy with possible adverse effect on productivity. So the pollen production is considering that the pollen production is mainly associated with the seasonal climate condition preceding the emission phase, temperature being one of the key variables involved. Data on flowering phenology and airborne pollen have proved to be useful for harvest forecasting purposes. Pollen monitoring can give us information concerning final harvesting several months in advance, and this application has been successfully tested both in crops such as olive, wine, chestnut, hazelnut, and other, but also in non-crop forest species such as oak, alder, birch, and others. And then the possibility of creating a forecast model, for example, for grape production using airborne pollen concentration in beeties, was investigated many years ago, more than 30 years ago in France by Besla and Cour. But this data has been confirmed by recent researchers, such as that carried out in North Italy by Cristofolini and Gottardini, but also in Portugal by Cunha et collaborator, and in Spain by Martin Bracero. But also in olive, we have this application because different papers on olive production have included meteorological variables in combination with annual airborne pollen to obtain more accurate indications. Just one paper, an example, is published by Oteros and the collaborators that emphasize that for olive production, higher pollen indexes and water availability during spring are related to an increase of final fruit production in a Mediterranean area. Furthermore, a decrease of fruit production is related with increasing air temperature during winter and summer. But in general, the dependent variable showed various relationships with different predictive parameters, depending, of course, on the studied area. So it will be necessary to consider in turn the best statistical predictors for phenology in different climatic areas. Nowadays, aerobiological research into the influence of pollen emission on final fruit and seed production also uses new computerized statistical tools and phenological models to obtain more precise information on agricultural yield, essential in order to ensure results marketable and that can be implemented in practice. For over 3 decades, have published a lot of works dedicated to the creation of models of varying complexity that would allow, through the study of histological biological data and the performance of the various climatic factors, to predict what will be the beginning of the pollination of a particular taxon, or when we have the beginning of the end of the pollen season and other parameters. But when a predictive model on beginning of pollination is being developed, it's necessary to take into consideration the different responses to environmental factors of the species considered. Temperature-based models are commonly used to predict the floral bud bursts as universal models, disregarding that they are site and species specific. Models working well in some regions may not respond so well in other areas due to genetic characteristics which enable plants to show different tolerance to particular environmental conditions. So for the modeling of the start of pollen season of a taxon, a thermal time method based on growing degree day must be normally implemented and adopted according to the studied site. So modeling to predict the performance of the pollen season with the intention of giving meaningful results as early as possible has led in aerobiology to the development of many analytical mathematical models, increasingly complex, like time series models, multivariate regression models, but also artificial neural networks, and more. This could be just the extreme solution. In any case, one of the major problems that has always characterized the aerobiological studies is related to the difficulty of sampling the particulate and its recognition and quantification. Various types of spore trapping devices are available today for sampling spore or pollen in the air, compatible with all types of biological analysis. Moreover, the development of new techniques and innovative practices for measuring airborne biological particles in real time, both for the direct delivery of timely information and for improving forecasts are now required. We believe that this is an essential condition for adopting the use of automatic systems to create more opportunities for new discoveries and, above all, new applications of aerobiological studies. Last year, Sofia published these interesting papers where he underlines that the current standard pollen observations carried out by Hirsch-type traps is not suited for assimilation in the forecasting mode, given the required time to get data, which are always delayed from a few days to up to 2 weeks. And direct usage of pollen data for the model-based forecasting become visible with the introduction of online pollen monitors, which can deliver the information within a few hours from the observation moment. This application will be possible with the introduction of new approaches to automatic pollen monitoring, which in principle allow for real-time availability of the data with no human involvement. In conclusion, aerobiology methods could be applied to many other fields, not only plant pathology or phenology or forecasting, but also in other fields of agriculture and forestry sciences, such as, for example, weeds and alien species introduction or transport of genes from GMO crops, release and the diffusion of pollen inside the orchard, pollen viability, germinability, and many other, urban forestry and other. But always the main goal for our research should be to support the effort to prevent forest degradation and contribute to an eco-sustainable approach of agriculture. And then I think in a word cloud for agriculture, we can add, of course, aerobiology. Agriculture is a topic which unites all aspects of aerobiology. That was John Lacey and Alistair McCartney say at the inaugural scientific meetings of the British Aerobiology Federation, more or less 27 years ago. And then almost 30 years have passed, and many changes, computerization and technical improvement have been made. And today, can we still talk about the close link between aerobiology and agriculture, with even increasing results, as shown by numerous and recent studies published in scientific journals and presented in international meetings such as this meeting, which reflect many interest towards these topics. And then I like to conclude my speech thanking you for your kind attention, and I wish you a fruitful week and a good work, hoping to meet you soon in person. Merry thing and have a nice week.
Thank you very much, Professor Frangulli. Thank you for your interesting, complete, and unedited review. I don't know if there is any question. There is no questions, then we can finish this keynote. Once again, thank you, Professor Frangulli, for your lecture.
Thank you for you, Javier. Have a good night, a good, nice week, working week.
Thank you very much.
Yes, it's a pleasure not to present Bernard Clot because everybody knows him. And I know Bernard Clot in the topic of aerobiology and biometeorology since more than 20 years. He is the head of biometeorology team at the Federal Office of Meteorology and Climatology of Meteo Suisse. We participate together to a lot of meetings, congress, studies, and he helped us to promote pollen network in the French Health Agency. For all these reasons, with Siegfried Jäger and him, we decided to found the European Aerobiology Society in Turku in 2008. Always many partnership with him and his team with new adventure with a METMET or to pollen program. A pleasure to present him and his keynote real-time monitoring beyond measurement.
Thank you very much, Michel. Hello, everybody. I don't know, I cannot see you, I cannot hear you, but I'm very happy to meet you today. And I would like to also to thank Carmen and all her team for this great organization of this symposium. I know it's a huge challenge, and now we are in and it's started, and I'm sure you are now in a better you feel better than yesterday. And I would like also thank Giuseppe because you paved the way for my presentation. So that's let's start now with this So, you know, real-time monitoring, automatic monitoring is not something very new in the ID. We were already discussing this topic 20 years ago, and I found an old presentation that I presented in the PAA meeting in 2003. And I was surprised to see that the IDs were all there. So the ID to have real-time availability of the data, to have automated data collection, low operating costs. I don't know if we are there or not, but and even the 3D measurement, so the measurement in the altitude, the ID was there. So the way to do it was not totally clear. Even if Eugenio showed us that it's performed with nowadays with drones or airplanes or many different systems. And at this time already, we were talking about these dispersion models and integration from continental to local and local to continental. And there were a lot of questions, and from the same meeting, is our different system necessary for different goals, or is it possible to have one universal system to monitor different pollen types and spores and other bioaerosols? And also the questions of, is it necessary to have everything counted at the same time, or everything counted at all? Or do we have to focus on a certain number, small number of different types? And the link with other measures in the air was also already discussed. But the way forward was this idea that it's impossible to do it alone. So at this time already, collaboration and complementarity, interdisciplinarity were in the center of our thoughts and the discussions when thinking about the monitoring of the future. With this word that collaboration is progress, even if competition brings some stimulation. And in the last years, the dream is coming through. We have a range of new automatic and real-time instruments. You see here some different on the roof of Meteo Suisse in Payerne. They are using very different technologies. They have heterogeneous characteristics, heterogeneous capabilities and prices. too. And if you would like to enter this world, I would suggest you try to remember some buzzwords such as laser or light scattering or induced fluorescence, microscope imaging or holography. All these different techniques that are used in some instruments, sometimes only one and sometimes combined. And another important word in this world is artificial intelligence, because these instruments produce so-called raw data that are very complex, and they need to be analyzed in order to recognize, to identify the different particles. And this step is frequently performed by using the artificial intelligence. We also developed during these 20 years the dispersion models. I have two examples here, but just to mention that exist. And these are still nowadays based on climatologies, and they are now currently being adapted to make the best use of the real-time data that are coming to be available. So this is another important part of the game, is to adapt these models so that they can use this real-time information that is beginning to be available. And we have also a framework for the collaboration we were dreaming for. We have this UMetNet Autopollen program, and you see here the first paper that was published very recently in Aerobiology, presenting what this progress aims at. And you see that immediately on this map, all the countries participating in Autopollen and a certain number of projects that are have developed in the last years to perform automatic pollen monitoring. I'm sure it's not a complete list of these projects. Many others are in preparation, or I heard of many others, but this is the most, these were the most active in the last years. So if you intend to start with automatic pollen monitoring or automatic bioaerosol monitoring, you will not be alone. In Autopollen, we have 27 participating institutions. They are listed here, 24 countries, if I'm not wrong. And we have also international groups, such as the European Aerobiology Society and the European Federation of Allergy and Airways Disease Patients Association. And but the core part is the National Meteorology Services, because UMetNet is the grouping of the European National Meteorological Services. This is a grouping based in Brussels. And the goal of this institution is to help its members to develop and share their individual and joint capabilities through cooperation programs that enable enhanced networking, interoperability, optimization, and integration within Europe. So exactly were the goals we had when we thought that it would be important that aerobiologists collaborate in order to make use of these new automatic systems. And it also aims at enabling collective representation with European bodies so that these capabilities can be exploited effectively. So meteorology, as aerobiology, is not limited to borders, and to cross these borders, we have this framework proposed, suggested for us, and it was possible to make then this Autopollen program that will last 5 years. We are now in the middle of this program, so I will show you some of the results we have obtained so far. But of course, not everything is yet finished. So Autopollen aims at developing a proof of concept for a real European automatic pollen monitoring network using high temporal resolution real-time measurements. If we have instruments that are able to automatically provide data, we would like that these data also very quickly are available, not only in our lab, but also for the different users, and maybe those who will do the forecasts, and the end users, maybe the allergic people in case of allergy for pollen, or maybe the agriculture, the farmers in the case of agriculture, forecast for agriculture for the spores. And we also hope that this program will serve as a springboard to establish the European pollen monitoring network of the future. So we try this proof of concept. It's just a start, it's not the end. And it's not like a research program that will end in 2022 and then probably most of it will disappear, but we really aim at having a long-lasting collaboration in this program. And we take advantage of the existing infrastructure. You know, it's a collaborative program. We take advantage of the activities of the Met Services and the Pollen Monitoring Institute. There were already in the past a lot of collaborations between these two groups because often in some countries, the Met Services perform the forecasts when the pollen networks do the monitoring. And the idea is that at a time where these new technologies appear and develop, was to discuss from the beginning and standardize from the beginning and cooperate from the start, instead of seeing things developing differently in different places and countries and having to harmonize a lot of practices and techniques 10 or 20 years later, as it has been the case in other disciplines. So we wanted a platform to discuss, exchange, share expertise, share efforts and costs also. And from the beginning, the collaboration with all stakeholders has been considered as really essential. As an example of a collaboration at international level, we have this collaboration with SCAMS, where we are with SCAMS, we are developing this prototype of operational use of real-time pollen data in the European forecasting models. And the database that has been selected to host our data is EBAS. So only the pollen concentration data will be there. All the raw data will stay in the home institutions because it's too large to transfer all of this huge amounts of data. We have also a very good collaboration with the Cost Action Adopt, new approaches in detection of pathogens and Iowa allergens, that is led by Carsten Skjot, another colleague you know very well, I think. And in particular, one of the main common activity we will perform is an instrument intercomparison next year. I will come back to that a little later. And also research and education. These are two main goals of the cost action and also aspects we would like to develop in Autopollen. And recently, we developed also a collaboration as one of our goals is to have harmonized practices for monitoring in Europe. We have a collaboration with this working group 39 of the European Committee for Standardization in order to prepare the standards of the future. Important, if you are interested in monitoring pollen or spores is that you consider the whole information chain. If you have new data that comes automatically and every, let's say, every hour or every couple of hours, then you have to adapt the whole chain of data treatment, quality control, also, as I mentioned already, the forecast, the models, the forecast models that in order that they really take advantage of these new possibilities. And of course, you have to adapt your products. If you as we do still with the standard pollen monitoring, we have a system that makes available on the internet our pollen data once a week. And from next year, we want to have a system that presents our data every hour. Then it's something different. There has to be developments. And of course, we don't do that just for the pleasure of having data quickly, but we do that to serve the users of these data. And in fact, here I show the information chain with these arrows. But what I should really show is that the user's needs are driving the whole chain and the whole activities. We don't do these activities for our pleasure. We do that because there are needs from users of this data and information. And of course, in this development, the user's needs are combined with the expert knowledge to develop the best solution that is also cost effective for the users to get support in the treatment of their or looking for a solution to their problems. And extremely important is the interaction with the stakeholders. We had at a European level a stakeholder workshop at the beginning of this year, just before the lockdown. We were very lucky with that at that time. We were interested in knowing what are the needs for real-time information. And a paper was just submitted, a position paper was just submitted. And this workshop will be repeated in 2 years. And we could identify different needs in main sectors such as health, allergy, agriculture, forecast. We see the forecasters also are as users of the real-time data. Research covering different fields from atmospheric chemistry and climate, etc. And also the climate and environmental changes. Giuseppe mentioned these some of these topics, also agriculture and climate change in particular. For those who are not yet closely involved in this process of automation, I would like to repeat or remind some important principles. So the first step of any monitoring is to have representative sampling. And pollen is in low concentration in the atmosphere, very low concentrations compared to many other bioaerosols, in particular because pollen are very large particles, so the sedimentation process is very quick. So to have a representative sampling of these rare events, we need high volume to consider high volume of air. But if we suck in a high volume of air, we suck in also a huge number of other particles. And then to discriminate pollen grains from these other particles, or to identify a specific type of particle among this huge number, is a very complex, a complicated task. And this is exactly the second step. This is the identification of the particles that are present in this volume of air that is analyzed. And important to consider is that with most of these automated systems, all the particles that are in these volumes can be counted, and some of them can be yet identified. It can be different pollen taxa or different spores or other classes of bioaerosols. And a difficult point is that the truth is unknown. We have no reference. We cannot look at a reference meter or kilogram and compare to it. We just try to understand what is in the air and try and hope that the instruments measure correctly. So what we can do to approach that is to collaborate with our colleague from the metrology, so the science of measurement, who are the specialists to calibrate instruments and to specify what these instruments are able to do. And we are presently collaborating with this Empire Aeromet 2 project. And in this project, there is a working group dedicated to the development of reference instruments to calibrate our samplers, automatic samplers. So that we can ensure that they count properly the particles that are going through the system. And another way to know if we are doing good job or not is to compare different instruments to perform parallel monitoring. So I just mentioned before this intercomparison that will take place in next year. And this is an example, but what is needed on every place you install a new machine at this time is to maybe to compare also with the previous system. So as we do always when you change a generation of instruments, you have a period of comparison of parallel monitoring between the two systems. Another challenge, as you know, is to monitor in outdoor conditions. You can imagine Finland in winter and south of Spain in summer, and just you have an idea of the range of different conditions and also types of particles that can be measured by these instruments. About this instrument intercomparison that will take place next year. It will be in Munich. We have already 8 different instruments, and some will be calibrated in Switzerland at our metrology office, who have one of these 2 facilities in the world to calibrate the counting of these instruments. And I would like to mention that we are open for additional instruments joining these campaigns, and also we are open to collaborations to analyze the huge amount of data that will be produced during these 3-4 months next year. So don't hesitate to contact me or Fiona Thurman if you are interested in taking part to this intercomparison. In the last years, there were also several papers published. I just counted. In 2015, there was 1, 16, 1, 17, 3, and then in 19, 7, and this year already some more. So I just picked some here that are really related to these new instruments of different types, and also to the development of networks. There are already a few networks operationally running. One in Bavaria, one in Serbia, and one in Switzerland is coming for next year. And among these papers, there are also interesting new things, such as the first results from this analysis, from this automatic pollen monitoring. Already the first reviews of the instruments or possibilities. And I show here also three instruments, three papers, sorry, that are interesting in that they present the possibility of using the remote sensing to detect some pollen in the air. So it's really the beginning of this possibility. It's not yet much developed, but still it shows that we will have in the future probably networks on the ground to monitor the concentration with high precision. And I hope also these remote sensing instruments that will allow us to know which are the pollen concentration in the third dimension, is instead the altitude above the location of the monitor. If you want to follow the progress of these works, which is really collaborative, they are in Autopollen, more than 80 colleagues who are collaborating to the works. So if you want to see the outputs of this, we have prepared an Autopollen special issue in Aerobiologia, and it aims at presenting the recommendations and best practices for monitoring first, for the instruments, for the site selection, for the network design, for the use of data, for the quality control, for the data storage, the data formats, for also the use of the machine learning algorithm or the development. And we also we want also to follow the impacts and the benefits of this real-time and high temporal resolution data. And the special issue is open for other contribution and will form the basis for establishing standards that might be overtaken by the CAN in the future. I have some tips, some things you have to think about if you want to start with automatic monitoring. First, you have to ask this question: do I want to install one station for my research, or do I want to plan a network for operational monitoring? In any case, I would strongly recommend, because this was the way for us to get the money to develop our projects. You have to demonstrate the user's needs and to have this collaboration with the users of your data. And then you have to ask yourself what you want to measure. Not all instruments deliver the same results for every kind of particles. So, and depending on your goal, you have maybe to select the different instruments. And you have also to think that the raw data require quite large storage capacities, data storage capacities. So think a bit in advance that it might be useful to be prepared for that. And again, parallel monitoring is very important to develop, to validate the method, and also to maintain the long time series. To conclude, I would like to remind you that high resolution data, aerobiological data, open the door for a much finer understanding of the factors influencing aerobiological processes. So it's really a new era for aerobiology. We have fantastic things to discover and products, so useful products for people having concrete problems, such as allergic people or agronomy, problems in agronomy with pests and disease, crop diseases. So we can find, develop tools to help these people and to make a difference. And this is really a fantastic process. And also the real time will make a quantum leap in forecasting and developing applications for a wide range of end users, because it's not only monitoring, but to know in advance what will happen is also very important in all these aspects. And we observe a convergence in techniques with aerosol and air quality measurements. Here, I'm not that sure because there are some difficulties because the size of the particles that are considered are quite different. But many things are in progress. We are in a new era, at the very beginning of a new era. So we need to keep a critical vision as usual in science, but we need to keep this critical vision on the results we are obtaining. And these are also things that are discussed in autopollen. Work remains to explore the full potential of these new technologies, to assess their quality and reliability in particular under different environmental conditions, and to develop and apply the standards and quality control measures. And we still need to enlarge the spectrum of the taxa that can be identified with these instruments. Keeping in mind in particular that in new environments, there are different particle cocktails. So the identification that can be performed in one environment cannot be appropriate for another environment. And also keeping in mind that all the biological livings are variable and can also vary from one place to another. And until we have tested that, we are never sure, or I mean, these developments are too recent so that we can be sure that it works everywhere exactly the same. And to finish, there is a need to invest in the whole information chain, from measurement to interpretation, from real time to forecast, and from raw data to end user applications, in order to develop the full potential of these new techniques. And these developments, as I said at the very beginning, will only be possible through the collaboration of research groups and researchers from many different disciplines in collaboration with all the stakeholders. So autopollen at the moment has an end in 2022, but its continuation is in preparation. And I hope many of you will be able to join at this time to take up together these exciting challenges for the future. Thank you. Michel, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much. You hear me, Bernard?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much for this nice presentation. It is very important. I think it is one main topic of the new generation of aerobiology, even if you start in 2003 in Chicago. But I think that it will be the future, and all the participation. Yes, I hear.
I think it's time for the next speaker, or? T'es encore là? Mais...
Ouais, c'est bizarre.
OK. Probably, ils ont passé sur l'autre.
Ouais. OK.
Super.
Thank you very much, Bernard.
Ça allait?
Thank you very much, Bernard.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.
See myself, but soon.
Yes. Okay, that's good.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I hope you hear me. I cannot see anything, or hear anything. No, so it's not yet on. Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? I hope yes. So we continue with the next speaker.
No.
And hello, I would like first to thank the organizing committee for this challenging Congress during this COVID situation we are, and especially Carmen. And I would quickly go to the next speaker. So he's an experienced aerobiologist for more than 2 decades. And for this reason, he has been leading a new cost action called ADOPT, New Approaches in Detection of Pathogens and Aeroallergens. And I don't want to linger anymore, so it's Professor Carsten Stjoth, and I'm really anxious to hear his provocative title provocative talk, entitled Emerging Methods of Bioaerosol Detection and Their Challenges in a Pandemic Era, Good versus Bad Bioaerosols. Carsten, the floor is yours.
Yes. So thank you very much, Thanos, for this introduction, and also like to thank Carmen and the entire team in Cordoba for this conference. It's certainly a huge challenge to organize this, and I'm pleased that I'm given the chance to make this presentation here. As Thanos just said, this also relates to relatively new cost action that will be running for a number of years. And here we have this provocative title, Emerging Methods of Bioaerosol Detection and the Challenges in a Pandemic Era, Good versus Bad Bioaerosols. So again, it's collaborative work, and that we will continue working on also after this presentation here. So this is a mini review, and where we're discussing detection methods, and also the detection methods in relation to what we see here in the pandemic era. So some of these things we have already seen when we're talking about bioaerosols. So I hope I'm not going to repeat too many things that we have seen before. And when we're so here, when we're looking at the bioaerosols, I have a figure to the right that shows a number of different bioaerosols that we can all detect with our instruments. So again, it could be pollen as an example. That could be using impactors or real-time devices. We are looking at fungal spores, bacteria, virus, lichen, algae, fragments of plants, fragments of animal material. So as long as it's very, very small. So generally speaking, these biological components, they are supposed to be passive, so we're not talking about insects, and they're supposed to be so small so they actually do stay airborne. So very large biological components, they are excluded. So the definition is somewhat well-defined, but there's also a gray zone. So again, we have solid airborne particles, while derived from a biological organism, so it can be virus as an example, plant debris, animal dander. We can have them released directly as primary biological aerosol particles. This could be pollen, this could be fungal spores, but it can also be inside droplets as virus, as in this case here, or through transformation. For example, that we have grass pollen losing the contents, then they're also releasing bioaerosols, just much smaller. So now let's back to basics. Why do we do this? Why do we actually collect bioaerosols? And then again, good versus bad. So there has already been one reference to the nice study from Spain. So while we can collect olive pollen as an example, this can be used in relation with forecasting models to predict, for example, crop yields. We can also be looking at climate change. So this could be bacteria, in this case, often Pseudomonas bacteria. While they can be, are they good, are they bad bioaerosols? Well, I will say that the question is probably not fully answered, but it's believed that they can be important in relation to climate change and in relation to precipitation. We can also talk about gene flow. Well, say, generally speaking, this is good. This is very, very important in relation to biodiversity globally, locally. But of course, it may also be considered negative, for example, in relation to GMO. So quite often when we see some studies in relation to gene flow, the majority of the gene flow is at the local scale, but from time to time, we get these long-range transport events. We can also look at biosols in relation to human health. There's have here a reference to a study by Heinzerling et al. In this case, it's in relation to hay fever and skin prick testing and the impact on the European population. So again, this is one of the major reasons why we have a very solid network here in the UK and the rest of Europe today. It can also be plant pathogens. Locally, it's often considered locally, but sometimes again we see global distribution or global transport. There was a study in Science back in 2002 by Brown and Hohmüller, but there's also some important studies over from United States, for example, in relation to soybean rust. We often have natural releases, so in most cases they are considered to be released naturally, and we have some really, really large variations in release, so in emission patterns seen, for example, for ragweed, they could be indoor, but actually it can also be considered to be released directly through man-made activities. It could be, for example, harvesting, or it could be indirectly through the crops we grow. Sometimes we see a transmission of invasive species as an example. So this could be, for example, in relation to ash dieback that we've seen progressing throughout Europe, where we have the pathogen itself enters into the trees, but the transport is actually usually through the air. We can also talk about lethal biosols that can be say really, really harmful in very small quantities, for example, in relation to bioterrorism. So in this case, again, this can be really, really important to be able to detect these things in cases present, for example, in relation to anthrax. It can also be, well, harmful to animals or lethal in the case of foot and mouth disease. There's also been shown that, yes, the airborne pathway is also one of the potential pathways for the transmission of disease. And recently in the Lancet, they argued that, that potentially the airborne pathway shouldn't be neglected, and there seemed to be potentially an overlooked pathway that the scientific community needs to dig into to figure out where is it actually being transported. And this could be actually a question for the biological community, but because who is actually good at detecting biosols? Well, the biological community. So overall, why do we do this? Well, it's information about the biosols. It's really for human health. It could be hay fever. It could be virus as an example. It's for plant health, for crop productivity, for animal health, for climate change, but also for the overall state of the environment, because again, biosols, they do reflect the state of the vegetation. So biosols can be used to detect, for example, healthiness of the vegetation. It can be used to detect, for example, biodiversity. So there are many good reasons why we do collect biosols, and there are many good reasons to use the information. So when we're looking at biosols and how they behave, well, sometimes we do see that biosols, they are transformed during their lifetime, so when they're being transported in the air. Often it's considered that they are quite light, so density 0.9 to 1, so similar to water, and have actually two figures up right here. So the figure to the right is a model calculation based on evaporation of direct small droplets of pure water. And we can see that these small droplets of pure water, they evaporate really fast, but also, as expected, that the impact of relative humidity is huge. So once we see a large increase in relative humidity, then we see rapid decrease in evaporation, so an increase in evaporation time. So it's often considered also that this will also be in relation to, for example, speech. And if we consider this in relation to the pandemic, for example, well, these very, very harmful biosols, will they also evaporate really, really fast? Well, not necessarily. And the reason is, it seems that when we speak, when we talk, when we cough, then there will be impurities in the biosols, in the water droplets, it could be mucus, and which actually prevents the evaporation. So there's been some recent studies here from 2020, chamber studies, where they were able to identify that the biosols from cough speaking eventually could be airborne from 5 to 8 to maybe 14 minutes. So again, these do still evaporate really fast, but there's a big difference between, for example, a few minutes and a few seconds. So maybe this is something that we should consider. We can also be looking at other biosols, for example, pollen grains. They can be dehydrated, partly hydrated. Again, there's a figure in the middle, and where we can see a hydrated pollen grain, a folded pollen grain, and again, depending on this hydration. So this is something we'll have to consider, because it will impact, for example, how far they're transported. It will maybe also impact how we're going to detect them. For example, if we're going to use real-time detection using image recognition. When we're looking at the pollen, and for example, or other fungal spores as an example, they can often form clusters when they're being released. So, and then they will separate furthermore. There's a nice study by Martin and al back in 2009, where they showed that firstly, when we're getting pollen release from ragweed, we have clusters, and then they will separate into individual particles. And finally, again, the figure lower right from the bioprecipitation hypothesis by Ulrich Pöschl et al. So again, where they illustrate and discuss the possibility for bacteria, Pseudomonas, quite often how they can activate cloud condensation and actually enhance precipitation, so therefore be an important part of climate change and the precipitation process. So again, number of different properties depending on what we're talking about, depending on whether we're talking about a clear biosol or whether we're talking about a small biological particle inside a larger droplet. So when we're talking about the detection, then what can we actually detect? So, well, for example, if we're looking at fungal spores as an example, well, we can culture them. So then when we're talking about culture concentrations, this is usually, say, viable fungal spores. We're talking about colony forming units. There can be colony forming units per square meter, per square cubic meter. This could be one approach. We can also look at viable concentrations in the air, and there's now possibilities with using molecular methods that we can separate, for example, live from dead cells. So this was published back already in 2007, but also later used in 2013. Bearing in mind that it's also been shown, especially in relation to, for example, SARS, that when we're looking at the sample, we have to be really careful, because our sampling process itself can lead to inactivation of our biosol. When we are collecting the aerosols, we would prefer to have total airborne concentrations. This can be pollen and fungal spores. We can use Hurst-type traps, rotarods as an example, and we prefer to have numbers per cubic meter as an example. We can also look, if we're looking into real-time devices or other types of instruments, then we'll have particles grouped, for example, bacteria of certain sizes, fungal spores of certain sizes, depending on how advanced instruments we have. We can also look at biosols using either immunological approaches or molecular techniques. I have here the figure to the right. This shows a coronavirus from a relatively new study from Finland by Uvaskainen et al. In 2020. So they have the colors 1, 2, 3. They correspond to well-identified taxonomic units. So I made a zoom to the right part of the wheel. So the wheel itself is actually, you can use this dynamically. You can zoom in and out. But let's have a look at that at the information here. So usually when we identify our spores, as an example, cladosporium, then we'll count cladosporium. But let's have a look at how the molecular techniques can actually identify a range of different cladosporium spores. So we have a large range of spores that we are able to identify that we cannot identify if we rely on optical approaches alone, because, well, the spores, they're more or less identical. this will give huge advantages in case you are interested in studies that try to connect, for example, a source and then actually what we measure, so-called source receptor studies. It can also be used to, for example, to develop more efficient approaches to mitigate harmful effects of spores. So again, there may be a number of approaches, but there's also some limitations, for example, because, for example, if we go for we like to quantify the total abundance, often for what's called qPCR as an example, well, we usually target specific species, and if we don't find that, we will find 0, but eventually we will find there can be something else in our sample which we do not detect. Then we can use metabarcoding, similar to the tools we have here in the figure, but they are not really fully quantifiable. So then we are ending up with relatively semi-qualitative targeting approaches. So again, we win some and we lose some when we move into these more targeted approach. Overall, it's very important if we want to use these data that we do whatever we can to transform our observations, for example, immunological approaches, molecular approaches, or real-time detection, into something that can be compared with other data sets from other instruments. So using ideally the terminology we use in our biology. So it sounds easy, but it's probably easier said than done. It can actually be a monumental challenge for our biologists, because how do we compare observations from different types of instruments that provides different types of information? So when we're looking at some common methods used for detection, I'm pleased to also use this lovely figure here, pictures we took this summer in relation to the COST-ADOPT network. So when we're looking at this, well, we can look at impactors, again, or host trap as an example, so used efficiently throughout Europe. We can also have different types of impactors. This could be, for example, the MTIST trap, where we're having small wells. So also an efficient way of trapping our biosource. So they have some advantages and some disadvantages. The advantage is that they are easy to use, they're robust, and they're applied throughout Europe. But there's also some limitation, for example, in collection efficiency in relation to particle size. Cyclones are being used. It seems that they're being used a little bit more these days. They're probably even more easy to use for compared to the impactors, because it requires even less preparation, and they're really easy to apply for downstream analysis, whether you're going for a more detailed investigation of pollen contents, different grass pollen species as in Brannan et al., or spores as Abrigo et al., or it could be allergens. So again, a number of different approaches, and it's relatively easy to collect your material. We can also go for filters. This can be very simple filter collection systems, or more cascade systems like the ones that were used in the Highline project, so high volume samplers. So the high volume samples have a number of advantages because they're sucking a large amount of air, and they can also separate the particle sizes. So they are used not only in an urban background, for example, for allergen detection, but cascade samplers, they're also used near waste sites, for example, when the interest is in harmful fungal spores, such as Aspergillus fumigatus. We're also looking into real-time devices, devices that Bernard was talking about in the last session. So we can have, for example, morphology using laser scattering, digital holograms, image recognition. There's a number of different possibilities here, but real-time devices are not only related to just looking at the morphology. Some real-time devices use different techniques, such as lab on a chip or DNA approaches, again, depending on the purpose. We can also use different types of equipment or methods. So planes, well, planes are not really a sampler, but they can carry equipment. This can be impactors, this can be cyclones or filters. So we have drones as given in the first lecture here, or we have passive gravimetric samples. So the figures to the right actually shows, say, a plane, a lightweight plane used for sampling of biosols, and the figure in the middle shows a study from 2019 by Casuela et al., where they have developed an efficient suction mechanism to be placed onto rotor type drone, which can be used for collection of biosols. Still, we shouldn't forget that we can also have passive samplers, gravimetric samplers as an example. They have been used for several decades, but also recently, and they can actually be quite efficient if we want a large data set covering a large region where it's not practical or it's very costly to have, for example, the more advanced active samplers. Finally, we shouldn't forget impingers, and also rotarods, and especially impingers, because impingers that are sucking in biosols into a liquid, they are still considered the most efficient sampling approach in relation to very, very tiny particles such as small bacteria, virus, etc. So again, which one of these approaches is the best? Which one is the best? Is the worst? If we're trying to detect very harmful aerosols, likely to be present in small quantities, well, it's difficult to say. It probably depends on the situation itself. And so far, it seems that to say the grand unified instrument that does it all for us probably remains to be developed, because all these different sampling techniques seem to have their advantages and disadvantages. Again, this here is just two maps of networks. So the top one is actually pollen monitoring sites in the world. So the site is maintained by the Munich lab led by Jeroen Boetes. So there's also the citation here, and it's an interactive map where you can actually zoom in and you can get the connection details and the type of collection we have at each of these sites. The figure lower right is say a less developed network. In this case, they're using cyclones, but mainly for eDNA analysis. Again, both these networks, they mainly place the samplers in the urban background. So if we're looking into the strengths and the weaknesses with respect to these different samplers, well, if we start with the impactors, so there's a nice review by West and Kimber from 2015. So while it requires limited effort to collect the samples. So, for example, our host trap, we have to prepare the drum with the sticky surface. So, depending on, we can also have the rotarods as an example. Some of them can have quite high temporal resolution, for example, like the spore wash sampler. And we have, as we can see in the previous slide, a very, very large network with respect to pollen collection. The weakness, again, it does require additional laboratory work, so it's time consuming and you get the data after some time. It will also require trained scientists, trained technicians to do, for example, the counting. We also have a cutoff for smaller biosols. Exactly where this cutoff is still a little bit hazy. There are some studies, but it doesn't seem to be entirely clear where we have this cutoff, whether it's just a slow decrease in collection efficiency, or where actually some particles, they go straight through the system. The capability for detecting very harmful biosols, well, I would say maybe good for some impactors, probably very limited for others. It probably depends on the design of a specific impactor. Then we move to the cyclones, again, also covered by West and Kimber. Well, the strengths is, again, very limited effort to collect samples, and the sample itself, very little impact on the sample. So we're not getting your sample into, for example, a sticky surface, which can cause some problems if you want to analyze your samples afterwards. So it's really well designed for post-processing. It could be ELISA, eDNA approaches, qPCR, etc. And there's a reasonable size network, so there's some knowledge around. The weaknesses really requires laboratory work again, and depending on what you do, sometimes it can also be expensive. Also, like the impactors, there's a cutoff for smaller biosols. Then again, this seems to be hazy. So what we see in literature, there does seem to be some disagreements whether the cutoff is on PM10, PM5, PM2, etc. The capability, again, for detecting very harmful biosols, well, if you look at the traditional cyclone samplers, for example, designed for collecting pollen, well, they are good for large aerosols, but for very, very small ones, for example, again, like the one that's causing the pandemic, as long as it's inside a larger water droplet, probably very efficient. Once it has evaporated, probably it goes straight through the system. So again, very limited for smaller, except for special designs, because you can have specific cyclones designed for smaller particles. We can also have the filters and the cascade samplers. Again, the strength is really separate the particles into size fractions, and in principle, they can be designed to collect everything. which means that they're well designed again for post-processing, for ELISA, DNR, etc. And the high volume samplers, they are much better for detecting rare species compared to, for example, traditional impactors or cyclones, simply because they are collecting much more air. So there's a bigger chance of collecting the rare species. The weakness, even more time consuming, even more expensive, again, depending on the analytical methods, and does require quite dedicated laboratory. However, the capability for detecting very harmful bioaerosols is probably very good, depending on the type of filters, because the filters can be designed to collect very, very tiny particles. So this could be a candidate. Our real-time devices, if we move to them, there's again a relatively new and excellent review by Hoffman et al. So the strength is really available in real time. So this is the big advantage. So we can get the data really fast. And there seems to be an expanding network. So Switzerland, Germany, as an example, and a number of countries seem to have a few samplers. The weakness, well, again, probably limited species recognition outside pollen. It could be related to, for example, the detection method. It could also be in relation to, for example, the numerics, or say the models behind it. They are very expensive, most of them, it seems, and then we're moving into an area where we require new skills. So, for example, handling big data. Probably, again, capability for detecting very harmful bioaerosols, they're probably very limited, partly due to many of them, they're quite small, which means, again, they will go straight through the system. So if we're then looking at our analytical methods, again, well, I have separated them into two: the real-time methods and the laboratory approaches. So again, the real-time, well, it's lovely because we do get the data really fast. And if we're looking after really harmful species that could be present in the air, then the real-time approach is really to prefer. Another good thing with the real-time approaches, based on the current approaches we see here today, is that the historical data can be improved afterwards by improving the underlying numerical algorithms. Again, due to, in relation to the current pandemic and this particular aerosol, probably they cannot detect them. I'd like to see this, it would be lovely, but I'm cautious, probably because if we're looking at this harmful bioaerosols, either it's hitting inside a larger water droplet, which will probably not be detected as a bioaerosol, or it will be very, very small and isolated without the water droplet, and then will again probably go straight through the system. The laboratory studies, well, they have the advantage that we can provide deeper analytical depth, for example, species specification on fungal spores that we cannot really see with the optical microscopes, or potentially with the real-time devices, species specification on pollen types, as an example, different grass pollen. So toxic properties, as an example, it's probably the only approach that can be used for detecting the really harmful bioaerosols in relation to the pandemic, if you can find a way to collect it. So where it is, we don't really know yet, whether it's, for example, in outdoor air, whether it's in the urban environment, whether it's in transport systems, we don't really know. We can also extend this with other methods to collect our materials, for example, planes, depending on the kit we put on them. We can have personal samplers, while personal samplers have some limitations in typically low suction, so they're not taking in that much air. It can be drones, which can be easier to deploy, really fast to deploy compared to a plane. We also, again, have this passive samplers and the impingers. The impingers seems to be really, really good, really, really efficient, but one of the limitations is really that they're collecting the air into, for example, the liquid, and the liquid will really fast evaporate. So for long-term collection, the impingers seem to be having a problem here. So again, which samplers should we be going for in relation to the most or harmful bioaerosols in relation to human health? Well, the questions would be the same in relation to agriculture. Probably depends partly on the sampling strategy. So we probably have two. So we can have a large number of low volume samplers, cheap samplers, or we can have high volume samplers that are less numerous compared to the low volume samplers. It also depends on the species, because some species, well, if we're looking into, for example, Humanocyphus fraxineus, so a harmful species in relation to plant health, or we can be looking into some species in relation to human health, in order to really detect them, well, we probably, in order to be accurate, need molecular approaches. Again, it could be ELISA or qPCR. I will also say that the location of the biosol, its distribution there, and the samples, that's really everything. So it depends on where do we have the source, what do we want to obtain. For example, we have rural background versus facility scale. If we are after a compost site where the main source is the actual compost and the purpose is to protect the workers on the compost site, for example, in relation to Aspergillus, well, then probably we'll place the samplers near the compost site and not in the background unless it's about detecting, say, the surroundings. It can also be the urban background, which we use for our pollen networks versus street level. If we're looking into the real-time devices again, then there's also two questions we have to ask. So do they use morphological recognition, or do we actually go for molecular recognition? So molecular recognition can also be done using real-time devices. And we also have to ask ourselves, is it good enough to get a risk, or do we really need accurate information? So again, using this sample at a composting site, is it good enough to tell the workers that there's a risk of exposure, or do they really need to know that now there is exposure? So again, so these are the questions that we need to ask ourselves. What do we actually want with the network, and what do we want to obtain? And finally, then of course, there's the financial background and the impact and the need. So do we need to protect specific workers? Do we need to provide information to a population? Do we need to provide information to, for example, agriculture? So again, if we're looking at biosols as a whole, well, it seems that for the time being, a grand unified instrument is not available on the market, because they all seem to have some limitations, either on the price, on the detection approach, what they can actually provide. So should it be a blended approach if we are after the full understanding with respect to biosols and human health and with agriculture? Well, we don't really know, but this could be one of the important questions that we can ask a scientific network. In this case, this was the rationale behind this cost action adopts, again, new approaches in the detection of pathogens and our allergens. How do we get things to fit together? How do we get the full story out of all the instruments, providing different types of information in relation to the biosols we have in there? So I provided a web link. So if you're interested in this, please have a look at the web link and see whether this is something for you. So again, I will say, I'd like to thank you for your attention. This is the end of the lecture. And again, I have the link to the cost action, this new approaches in detection of pathogens and our allergen called ADOPT. It might be something for you. And in relation to the lecture itself, there's a number of references. So I have 3 pages of references in case you're interested. And again, so please request these references or use the lecture. So, and that's more or less it. That's the end of the lecture. Any questions so far?
Thank you very much, Carsten. I don't know how much time we have, so there are some comments and questions.
Yes.
I would like to ask something myself, which actually repeats also a question by Branko in a previous session.
Yes.
It's very interesting. I mean, you gave a very nice overview and also a glance to the future about methods that are promising and probably in the whole background of aerobiology. But still, it's something that one could wonder about. Everybody mainly focused or still focuses on allergies, so on medicine. And it's really impressive if you think, if somebody really now has heard your talk, and it's really impressive that we have so many possibilities and so many different techniques, methods, bioresources, and still we are, to an extent, stuck, if I may say, to medicine. I don't know if somebody can reply this, so I don't know if it's really a question, maybe it's a comment, but do you have an explanation? How can we change things? Or maybe Carmen also, because I see could also have your opinion, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think actually that we should never forget allergies and human health. I would also say that if we take, for example, the current pandemic as an example, that's certainly human health. So when say the medical community asks this question, is it actually airborne and where is it airborne? I would say this is the question for an aerobiologist to answer this question, trying to find it. It can be like finding the needle in the haystack. Maybe we will fail, maybe not, but we are in the position to answer that question. So that's one thing. If we're looking beyond human health, then I would certainly say agriculture. So we have huge problems in agriculture in relation to, okay, too much usage of pesticides as an example. And but if we don't do anything, so protect our crops, then we also get problems, because we have to feed the world. And it's been estimated, for example, in the UK, that we can easily lose 20% of our crop if we don't fight the diseases in the crop. So it's very, very relevant also to look at the crops. And this can be either crops on the soil, it can be sitting on the soil, inside the soil, it can be in the leaves. So sometimes they're being transported, and we're talking about invasive species. And from a financial point of view, then it shouldn't be underestimated how important it is for the agriculture that we come up with solid data. And I'll say that the experiences from the United States with soybean rust was excellent, that they demonstrated actually once they got agriculture involved in this, and they were also interested in financing the observations and the development of the network, because in the end, the farmers, they're looking at the bottom line. And if it turns out to be, say, positive for them, they say by supporting a network, they can actually get a bigger surplus. Well, then it's a good case study. So that was really the positive story from the States when they start looking into soybean rust. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Carsten.
Yes.
And another last one, Carmen, I will just be fast.
Yes.
So you mentioned already that, of course, new approaches require new approaches also in data analytics.
Yeah.
We all know, and many of us use also artificial intelligence. So another question is whether for the novel methods, whether we already have the capacity, either data-wise, so if we have enough data, or if it is too early maybe to use artificial intelligence, or if you can foresee what is the road there, how we can proceed.
So I'll say, for example, artificial intelligence. My experience is that for the time being, this is related to the real-time detection devices. So, well, when we move into, for example, eDNA approaches, then we are dealing with similar problems, but it's not, it may be neural network modeling could also be an approach, but it is really a big data question we're dealing with when we're trying to, for example, go through all the genetic sequences and comparing the specific genetic sequence from one specific sample with a huge library. And this library will expand all the time, every time we are sequencing more biological material. And so this is not straightforward at all. And it is my experience that a good bioinformatician actually has a solid background in computing.
Thank you very much, Carsten.
Yes.
And that's all.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well then say thank you very much. Thank you, Thanos. Thank you, Carmen.
Thank you all. Thank you, Carmen.
Yeah.